So I have 9 years of experience under my belt dealing with a new scientific discovery. I want to share with people some very valuable lessons here. I printed them out so it's not as off the cuff as I usually make these talks. Hi, Celeste. She's still at work right now. Let's get started with the basics. People hate being told they are wrong. That's obvious. But academics do a more insidious version of that. What I've learned is if you present an idea they consider wrong, they feel insulted. You don't even have to say they're wrong. All you have to do is present something they consider to be wrong, and they get all huffy and angry. Yes, it's true. The academics, the ones that work in institutions, if you were to talk to them about an idea that is different than what they believe, I guarantee you they'll be very, very angry with you. Academics cannot handle ideas that they don't believe. They have no capacity for thinking outside of themselves. They're really institutionalized academics. They're just totally impervious to reality. Good luck discussing new ideas with them. It's not going to go through. I guarantee it. I have 9 years, and I can attest to my experience with that. That's just how it is. I spent so many years in school that they're institutionalized. There's no thinking outside the box. Academics are not trained to think creatively. They are trained to accept status quo. Whatever everybody else believes, they go with that. They're sheep for the most part. It is a very small minority of academics that are the nastiest of the bunch and keep all the others in check. Most academics are nice people, caring. You can, talk, have conversations with them. But if you're going to present an idea inside the academic community, it's not going to be all of them that are going to circle the wagons and protect their little, idea. It's going to be a few of them that are going to be really loud, really nasty. Those are the pseudo-skeptics of the world. Those are the Michael Shermers of the world, the people that like to ridicule others and make things horrible for that new idea that comes into being. It is usually the most closed-minded academics that work their way up the career ladder. Once you start thinking for yourself, you're lost. If you're going to work up the scientific community, don't go willy-nilly with new ideas. Only accept what everybody else already believes to be true. It's very simple. And here's the dangerous one. You cannot think for yourself and be creative and work your way up the career ladder at the same time. They are mutually exclusive. If you're going to work your way up the career ladder, you better go on with what everybody else says is true. If you start to go off on your own program like Halton Art did, they're going to be forced to resign. They're going to be like, well, we're not going to give you any money for that. It's a very tribal-like mentality. Here's the second portion of this. This has to do with my dealing with ridicule and stuff like that online and YouTube. The more views I've been getting, the more ridicule I get. So I can expect to get more people coming out of the blue, people I don't even know, ridiculing me and telling me that I'm spreading bullshit, or that I'm wrong, or that I'm pathetic, or what have you. It sort of doesn't affect me anymore because there's so much of it. If it was a single person saying that, I'd be like, oh, well, this guy's an asshole. But because there's so much of it, there's kind of like a pattern there, and it doesn't even affect me anymore. It's just like, oh yeah, water's wet, sun is big, the earth and rocks are hard. It's these basic stuff. It's not a shock to me anymore. And there's a saying, you don't kick a dead horse. This meaning, if I weren't a threat, there would be no ridicule. So clearly, with people all ridiculing me, that I'm a threat. I'm a threat to them. And I don't mean to be a threat. I mean, I'm just trying to share a major discovery with people, but like I said in the first one, academics hate being told that they're wrong. So when I expose them for not understanding that stellar evolution is the process of planet formation, planets are old dead stars, they get really upset with me over that. And here's the point one, number 3. The fact that people choose to watch these videos is up to them. I'm not forcing anybody to watch them. Nobody has to watch these videos. So why are they getting upset? You don't have to watch them. If they make you upset, you can watch other things. Very powerful lessons, much more powerful than the discovery. It's human nature I've been learning about, how people treat new ideas. And it's at the very essence of what it means to be a scientist. It's like, even scientists disagree with other scientists vehemently in many cases. They get very, very upset that their ideas are being challenged. Really smart, intelligent people argue with really smart, intelligent people and have completely different worldviews. It doesn't mean that they're crazy or crackpots or whatever. It just means they're just different. They have a different way of looking at things. And that's just history. That's how things roll. That's how progress is made. You have people arguing, and then eventually the new idea wins out over many decades, and there you have it. Number 5 here. Genuine science sometimes makes people stick out from the crowd. And sticking out is not good in academics. There are communities full of conformity and agreement. If you're going to make a scientific discovery, I hope it isn't something big. If you're going to be working in the scientific communities or scientific fields in any way, make tiny little discoveries that nobody notices. But don't make the big ones. The big ones are going to make you stick out, and everybody's going to ridicule, and they're going to be very upset with you, and you're not going to have a career. Do tiny little itty bitty little insignificant discoveries that nobody notices. Don't make the big ones. The big ones get you lots of problems. It's like big money. If you have lots and lots of money, you're going to have more problems. Large academic communities are rooted in cohesiveness of ideas. The academic communities, they need all the ideas to all match each other. If there's inconsistencies in the ideas or the stuff that doesn't fit, they're not gonna be funded. An academic community has to have everybody thinking the same way. Ideas, albeit scientific ones, that do not fit their paradigm are ignored and ridiculed. So let's say you make a major scientific discovery. If it's a big one and it doesn't fit their worldview and your group members' worldviews and your peers' worldviews, they're going to ridicule you and or they're going to ignore you. And or you're just not going to receive funding for it, which means you're not going to be able to have a career. You're not going to get any grant money, and everybody's going to shun you and blacklist you and whatnot. So it's very dangerous to stick out, in other words. Even though you might be extremely intelligent, if you stick out too much and or you make a major discovery that disagrees with what they believe to be true, then, well, you're SOL. It's not going to be fun. 3. And I learned this from this book, Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers, Stanton T. Friedman. I've been reading this book a lot. And from what I've discovered, the CIA and the NSA and large intelligence organizations, especially in the Air Force in particular, back in the 1950s and 60s, they know psychology, they know sociology. The way to get people uninterested in things is to form a cloud of ridicule around the subject matter. I have here, the main method for control over people is to make the subject matter have a fog of ridicule around it so that others don't bother touching it for fear of ridicule themselves. And that was their MO. That was the Air Force's, the CIA's, all of these intelligence communities that had information concerning, the radar reports and the Navy pilots and Air Force pilots seeing flying discs that, were outmaneuvering their jets and whatnot. They wanted to make it to where they looked at people and said, well, you're just crazy. And they elevated the crazy cases, the people who were clearly crazy, as being the ones that only saw these UFOs. And then they instituted a program of ridicule to make sure that nobody gained any interest in it because it was a major national security issue. They wanted to have all the really good stuff. They wanted to have the stuff that mattered. And then they formed a cloud of ridicule on it in the public sphere and paid off media people to push the really crank and crackpot ideas or people who were just making things up willy-nilly. You could tell they were making things up. And then they kept all the really great stuff for themselves. The fact that, there are discs observing nuclear test sites. There were discs around radar receiving equipment flying around. There were discs chasing jets, being chased by jets. All that's recorded throughout history, all the way back from the late 1940s all the way up until now. In the U.S. Navy released 3 videos of 3 separate UFO incidences. We can actually see them now. I guess 2020 is when they were like, screw it, we'll just tell them they exist, you know. But back in that day, they made a fog of ridicule around it to make sure that nobody showed any professional interest in it. And, you know, didn't, you know, we're afraid of pursuing the issue. But number 2 here is, I've learned over my experience with this discovery of, you know, what the Earth is, that once you see through that fog of ridicule, it all becomes very clear. Human beings act out of fear of the unknown and are reactive. They're not proactive for the most part. We have a tendency of not thinking about serious issues before they occur. We have a habit of reacting to things as they happen. So we don't usually tend to think in terms of, well, this is probably going to happen. We should make sure this doesn't happen in the future. Be proactive with it. Most of the time, large groups of people, they get reacted to things. We can see that now with this whole rioter and protester thing. You know, they're reacting to the murder of George Floyd, but they're not being proactive, meaning they're not seeing the underlying issues here. And the underlying issues isn't police brutality. It's the breakup of the family through a lot of really, really bad liberal policies of, you know, giving more welfare to people and breaking up the mom and dad relationships and family units. So when the dad isn't there, then, you know, the young men don't have father figures to look up to, and they don't get in trouble because they know that, hey, you know, dad isn't doing that. You know, let's not get in trouble. Let's not, you know, join gangs and all that stuff and participate in a lot of violent activities. But, you know, I don't want to talk about that. But basically, human beings, they tend to just look at what's now versus what caused that. They look at the symptoms versus the causes. And I think a lot of the medical industry does that too. They attack the symptoms, not the causes of a lot of diseases. Because that's all we really have to work with. It kind of sucks, but, you know, that's true. Number 3, this is why I'm working on the theory long before it hits the mainstream. I see the necessary changes that need to be made to astrophysics, astrochemistry, biology, and geology long before they hit mainstream public awareness. That's the goal. Just be proactive with all this. I see the problems they have, and in the future, when they're like, oh, well, what do we do wrong? None of this is working. They're going to look at this idea and be like, oh, well, this guy figured it out a long time ago. I don't know, the guy told you so, whatever. I'm very, very proactive, working on understanding of nature before it happens, yada, yada, yada. And what this means is by the time this discovery is accepted, what I'm going to see is people will think it has always been known. It's a very strange effect. By the time a lot of people in the world already, or it's accepted in the mainstream, a lot of individuals everywhere are just like, oh, we've always known that, right? We've always known. No, people, they tend to have very short memories. No, they're not teaching that planets and stars are the same objects. They're teaching that they're different objects. That's why they call them star and planet. As well, I remember there was one individual I was like just talking random about, like one of my friends, like back in the day. I was like, so you know the Earth is an ancient star, like there's no difference between the two. And he said, like, yeah, my teacher already taught us that in my class. And I was like, what? He knows about this? It's like the teachers all over the United States right now, like high school teachers and college professors, they're already telling their kids about this. It's nuts. I mean, I only get like a dozen views on each video, but it's spreading like wildfire, and I'm basically already done. It's already spreading. I just don't see it on this specific channel, but it's already spreading. And that was like 6 years ago. And finally, last but not least, the best way to deal with ridicule is to ignore it. It is very easy to get offended these days, but really it doesn't do anybody any good to argue about major scientific discoveries. Either it's been made or hasn't been made. There's no use in arguing about it. I'm not about convincing people of it anymore. I just link the book to them. I like read the book, look at it, whatever. I'm done arguing with people online about it. It's a waste of time. You can't convince people of stuff. They have to convince themselves of something. And last but not least, and this is very important, the academics need for themselves to see how they need to change, but society and human understanding of nature doesn't necessarily need them to change. What I'm saying is human understanding and progress, human understanding will progress and does progress in lieu of academic or journal editor approval. Our understanding of nature is just going to branch off. We don't need approval from academics or scientists. Understanding nature, understanding the world around us spreads through the internet now. We don't even need journal editor approval. We don't need it to be taught in universities. People can learn about new ideas that are very different than what's being taught in schools right now. We don't need their approval. We just design it, develop it, make it true, and then the academics eventually realize where they went wrong and they start teaching it as if nothing ever happened. And I have here, in effect, it has to progress without their approval. If our understanding of nature relied on academics' approval before we can move forward, then nothing would ever get done. If we had to rely on people in universities who lecture all the time to make the big changes we need to see, then nothing would ever get done. Nothing would ever get discovered. It would stall out. Because academics, their goal isn't to be creative, it's to repeat what's already been discovered. See, their goal isn't to be creative, their goal is to maintain status quo. But if industry makes important inventions, if industry makes important discoveries, if people like me who don't work inside of academics make major discoveries, they're going to be forced to change. They have no other option. All right, I guess I made this talk long enough. I printed this out in like 5 minutes flat, but it's a few ideas I want to discuss with you guys to let you guys know where my mind is and give a little update. All right, later, y'all.